All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and go back into open session. Turn my volume. All right, so we'll go ahead and go back into open session. I'm sorry for the delay. I apologize for that. So all board members are present with the exception of Mr. Orozco, who is unable to be here tonight. And at this time, we'll go ahead and do the flag salute. Carl, if you might lead us in the flag salute, please.
Yeah. Attention, salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So prior to us going into closed session, we did amend the agenda slightly. We moved, just for public record, we moved items 25A and B to old business. So just so we can make a note of that. We also took action in closed session on items 9C's, D's, and E's. And those were motioned by Diane, second by Paul, and those were voted on unanimously.
Sorry.
And no school reports, no special recognition. We'll go ahead and go straight into public input. If anybody wishes to address the board regarding anything that is not on the agenda, they may do so at this time. Go ahead and send me something in the chat box. I'll give you guys a little time to do that. Seeing nothing in the chat box, I'll go ahead and close the public input and go on to special presentations.
Thank you. This evening, we have Mrs. Barajas Ruiz. Norma is going to share with us a new requirement for districts. And you've heard a little bit about it, but we're going to give you some more information to be able to ensure that everyone understands this new requirement and what our tasks are going to be for the next couple of weeks. And I'd like to thank Norma for putting the presentation together this afternoon and for being here. Thank you.
Good evening, President Winter, members of the board, Dr. Fisher, members of the executive cabinet, and those in attendance. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a little bit of information on what, give you a presentation on something that will feel very familiar, even though it has a new name. And as we get into it, you'll see exactly why I say that. So we're here to talk about the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. As we know, there have been many changes to the requirements due to COVID-19. One item that has undergone a few changes up to this point is the LCAP. In lieu of submitting an LCAP back in the spring, we were directed to complete the written operations report, which described what we did during the school closure timeframe. Given that the start of the next school year will look different, and most likely be different from what we did in the spring, the state is asking us to prepare a plan that resembles the LCAP, but is geared towards the current COVID-19 situation. On June, is the PowerPoint, sorry, first slide. On June 29th, Governor Newsom signed SB 98, which eliminated the requirement of the LCAP for 2021. And in its place, we will be completing the Learning Continuity Attendance Plan, which has the same letters as the LCAP, but it's being referred to as the LCP. And I told Mrs. Wood, it's the little LCAP.
Oh my
It looks like the LCAP, but it's just a little bit.
Wow.
So while this isn't a compliance opportunity, it's a compliance item, it's also an opportunity for us to vet our planning against the state expectations, refine our processes, and to describe to our community what is the plan moving forward. This plan will need to be approved by September 30th by our board, and will be submitted to the county. The county does not necessarily approve the plan, but they do have the opportunity to give us feedback, written feedback.
Thank you. Thank you. So the county does, there it goes. The county doesn't necessarily approve the plan, but they do have the opportunity to give us written feedback, as does the California Department of Education. If we were to receive written feedback, we'd have 15 days from having received it to respond in a board meeting. And the state and the county have until October 30th to give us any written feedback. There are 5 areas in the LCP, the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan, that we will be addressing. And the draft template is out, which is really good, because now we can begin to collect information based on what it is we know that they're going to be asking for in that template. Similar to the LCAP, the LCP will require stakeholder engagement. Of course, it's going to look different because of COVID-19, but we do still want to get input from the stakeholder groups that normally give us input on the LCAP. Students, staff, parents, community members, our bargaining units, administrators, teachers, DLAC, and our District Parent Advisory Committee. Given the situation, like I said earlier, most likely it will be virtual input sessions. We will also be able to use the data that we collected with some of the surveys we did in the spring. We did ask parents and teachers and staff, how did distance learning go in the spring? So because we asked those specific questions and we need to address them in the plan, we're going to be able to use some of the feedback that we received from our stakeholders in those surveys. The meat of the plan is really the instruction, which embodies the assessment, engagement, and mitigation of learning loss for students. We will be asked to address how we will support the social and emotional needs of both our students and our staff. And that will include addressing how we will provide professional learning. Are there resources that we're going to be providing to both students and staff? And then we will also give a description of how we will continue to provide our meals to our students. As I mentioned earlier, the heart of the plan is what is it we're going to provide to students in terms of instructional programs. Within the section for distance learning programs are all of these components that will need to be addressed. And as you'll note, there are 4 student groups that at a minimum will need to be addressed throughout the program. And those student groups are English learners, students with exceptional needs, receiving special education services, students in foster care, and students who may be experiencing homelessness. Within the plan, sorry, I keep trying to run 2 different, okay. My slide here and then up here. Within the plan, we will need to address any changes to roles and responsibilities, as all of the programs that we're looking at currently, possibly providing in the fall, will look different than what we've done in the past. And so as staff members, specifically classroom teachers, roles and responsibilities are going to look differently based on those programs that we're going to be offering and possibly implementing. And again, we will want to address what those changes are, what professional development, and what resources we're going to provide our staff. We'll also speak to how every student will receive the same curriculum and the same quality of instruction, regardless of the program that they're enrolled in. It'll be our task to ensure that if a child is accessing instruction virtually, that they're receiving the same curriculum at the same high quality as a student who may be attending twice a week on campus in any of our classrooms. So if the instructional program is the heart of this plan, student participation and engagement is what will keep that plan pumping. It's the lifeblood. We could have the most beautiful, amazing plans for instruction, but students have to actually engage in instruction to gain something from it. So while the instructional piece is absolutely essential, the plan is going to ask us to really dig into and describe what are we going to do to make sure every student is participating. I had the privilege of doing Migrant Summer School, which was 100% online. So we were able to kind of work through some of these things that are going to potentially be there for us in the fall. And we also know through distance learning in the spring, we heard from parents and students, what were some of the challenges for them? So for this section, just in my opinion, it will take a plan, a robust plan for communication. What we found during the summer is, and during the spring, is parents aren't always home. So it's the child who's responsible for logging on and getting on. So we found that a lot of times if the parent is gone, that child may or may not be doing what they're supposed to do, which is logging on to access the instruction. We also made assumptions that at a certain level or age, kids knew what to do. And what we found out, we did phone calls and home visits, and what we found out is there were still some big kids that would call and say, how do I log into my Google account? I don't know how to get to Google Classroom. So these are all things that we'll have to think about when we get to this section of our plan. And in terms of that robust communication process, we want to be thinking about who will parents call with questions? Who will call parents if students are not engaging? Who will walk a child or a parent through the steps to log in? Who will troubleshoot issues of connectivity? We'd get phone calls. I'm trying, but I've only got one little bar and I can't see the video. I can't log into the Zoom meeting. How will we connect students to services that they may need, such as mental health, using the systems that we have? How will we keep kids motivated and engaged in school activities in addition to classes? Things like virtual assemblies, enrichment and extracurricular activities. How will we offer trainings for parents so they can support from home? And how will this be done at the classroom, the site, and the district level? Our goal will be that every student participates, engages, and makes progress from current levels. And this section is our chance to describe how will we keep our kids engaged and participating so that there is learning for every single one of our students. Throughout the plan, again, we will address how will we support at minimum these student groups. And I know I mentioned it earlier, and I'm sure that's something that you've heard and have been discussing, and that's the issue of student learning loss. We know that there has been and there will be learning loss, if not for all students, then for many of our students. It just is, given that we're not able to bring everybody onto our campuses and instruct in the way that we would normally do. So in this plan, we will want to address how will we measure learning loss? How will we provide student support, especially to the 4 student groups that the plan is calling out. Assessments are not new. So for us, the task will be thinking outside the box and how do we use assessments in a non-traditional classroom setting in some situations to assess where students are at and to monitor their progress as they go along, regardless of what program they are enrolled in. We will need to make some funding considerations. At this time, we know that we will need to include all of the supplemental and concentration funds in the plan. So just like the LCAP, what monies do we have? What are the actions that we're implementing using those funds? And then we are able to include any of our federal funds, specifically Title I, Title II, how are we using those? And then we did hear today at the meeting that we will also address any of the federal grants that we just received, like the CARES funding, that we'll include in this plan. What did we receive through the CARES funding? How did we use it? That will be part of the plan. We can also include any other categorical funds so long as they address the action items that we're going to be speaking to in our plan. So it's a very compressed timeline. September 30th is not that far away, and there's a lot of things. So this is where I say it really is the LCAP, just in a little tighter time frame. The template is a little bit less lengthy than the old LCAP, but it really is At the heart of it, the same notion. It's what is the district going to do? And through this plan, how do we communicate it, gather input from our stakeholders, and then communicate the plan to everyone. So just based on this timeline, our goal is to bring back a draft of the LCP plan to you August 18th for your input, and then share it out with all of our stakeholders and gather input from them. To bring it back to the board September 8th, we do have to have a public hearing that is separate from the night that you approve it. And then our goal is to bring it back to you September 22nd to approve it so that we make the September 30th deadline. So here are just some of the immediate next steps for our team. Gathering, there's a lot of information we already have in our system that we can begin to gather. Complete internal requirements in order to address the key areas of the learning continuity and attendance plan, such as creating job descriptions if needed, planning our professional development based on whatever the program is going to be for our students or the multiple programs we may be offering our students. What is the professional learning? We can definitely be planning that out. And then we can also look to acquire instructional resources and materials that may be needed for addressing specific areas or specific student groups within the plan. And then, of course, for us at the district level, attending virtual trainings, the county will be offering once every 2 weeks, they will be offering sessions. CDE is also offering sessions, so we will avail ourselves of those. And then we've already tentatively at least selected dates for our stakeholder input sessions. So I thank you for the opportunity to present this information to you. And I would be happy to answer any questions the board may have. Any
questions from the board? If not, there is one from the community at large. How will learning loss be assessed since the district does not currently have a diagnostic screener? The tough ones, not from us this time.
I know that I can speak to what I'm aware of. And I know that at the site level, there are diagnostic tools that are being used throughout our system. They may not be systemic at this point, but there are. We also know, I just saw something from CDE. We also know that CDE, the CASP suite, has a lot of resources available. And I know that we have, our CIA department has looked at resources and tools that could be used as diagnostic assessments across the system. So,
Hope that answered that question.
okay, all right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norma.
All right, so at this time, we need a motion for consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda. I'll second.
Motion from Paul, a second from Carl to approve consent agenda as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Diane?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Carl?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, on to,
First item in new business.
actually, Larry, I'm going to stop you there.
Donation.
We're actually, we moved one item
that's
under
right, we
old
moved
business,
some
or two
items
items
under
under old business. So we need to,
Oh, we're there already.
we are already there.
All right.
That's
Okay.
you, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, President Winter. I wanted to take this time to discuss our school reopening guidelines that's been under consideration and the work of our task force as we consider instructional models and where we're planning to go for the coming school year. At our last board meeting, we shared information on our proposed instructional models. And during that time, I also shared information that our task force and subcommittees have been working on the Selma Unified Reopening Guidelines. And I just wanted to speak to that a little bit tonight because there will be some recommendations that I'm going to make to the board tonight, I think in lieu of our current and recent information that we've received. So I want to start by saying I want to thank everyone on the Selma Unified team who've been working so feverishly over the last 2 months. We're dealing with situations currently unknown in the history of education. And there's no roadmap, but we've tried our best. And so our team began to gather information, look at guidelines and resources from the state level, from local levels about how to safely reopen schools when the time comes. And so we began to craft a document, gleaning information from various sources across the spectrum, based on input from CDC, based on input from the state, from the county, Cal OSHA. These are the safety guidelines that have been presented to districts as they consider reopening. So I won't go through this document in its entirety right now, but I want to share with you some very important information that has arisen. Again, over the past 2 months, we've been working diligently with staff and stakeholders, making plans for the safe reopening and return of students back to our campuses. The team has finalized our draft reopening guidelines for parents, and Ms. Wood will also share in a bit our draft reopening guidelines for employees. Very comprehensive and very exhaustive with regard to safety precautions that we're currently under. Even with all this planning, we have been consistently reminded that our plans are subject to change based on public health conditions. Knowing this, we proceeded on knowing that we want to be proactive and ready based on whatever conditions come our way. We know that we want to be flexible as we agree to the priority of maintaining the health and safety and well-being of our students and staff. What I want to start by saying is that we clearly believe having students return to campus in the traditional model of all 5 days a week is optimal. However, unfortunately, this is not an option for us at this time due to increased spread of the COVID-19 virus and very high risk levels. Our team initially presented at the last board meeting a tentative proposal for reopening in a blended or a hybrid model. And based on that, we asked our parents to pre-register their students so that we could get an idea of our numbers to be able to see if we would be able to accommodate their requests. I want to thank all of our parents who have pre-registered their students, and nearly 60% of our students, our families, have completed the pre-registration process. Throughout this process, we are gleaning information about parent choice. And nearly 40% of parents indicated a preference for an off-campus learning option for your students, meaning they prefer that students remain home and learn from home in some type of modified environment. Based on state and local guidelines and on stakeholder feedback over the past few months, our administrators and our teachers and our staff have really worked on models that we think could safely bring students back to campus. Through all of the hard work, much collaboration, sharing of thoughts and ideas went into the completion of this project. And I would like to personally thank Norma Barajas Ruiz and Brenda Lopez for their work on organizing this document in a very user-friendly format. However, unfortunately, as of Monday, July 13th, which was yesterday, districts were provided information indicating that current public health conditions show a significant increase in COVID-19 in our county and in our state. During a nearly 3-hour meeting, superintendents across the Fresno County, school board members, public health officials, and physicians from Valley Children's Hospital shared current data and statistics regarding increased risk levels that should be considered in the reopening of schools within the next several weeks. Due to current public health conditions in our county and in our community, maintaining health and safety and reducing the risk of community spread must be the basis for our decision to return students to our classrooms and to our campuses. So with that, as your superintendent tonight, it is my recommendation that we pivot from our initial plan to bring back students in a blended and a hybrid model of 2 days on campus and 3 days off campus, that we would pivot at this time to a full distance learning model with plans to shift to blended or other instructional options in late fall or as soon as our public health officials indicate that it is safer to do so. I want to be clear that distance learning for the fall will look dramatically different than it did when we went out in March. With our focused and comprehensive planning, we were prepared to pivot to a distance learning model should conditions worsen. This is now the case. I'd like to ask the staff, and Jennifer, I'm going to give you just a hard copy. Oh, no, I wasn't really going to do that. I did want to show them page 18, though.
Okay, sorry, guys.
If you could just show page 18. I want to just share with the trustees and with the public, our team really planned for lots of scenarios. And in our comprehensive reopening plans and our guidelines, we planned for a scenario should public health conditions worsen. We also included in our plan having to go to 100% distance learning. So we were prepared either way. And as you have heard, we've just been given the directive that it's probably best to consider this option right now due to the increased surge of COVID-19 in our state and in our community. So I am referring the board and the community to what we planned to be Model 3 in our draft reopening guidelines. We already thought ahead about if we have to go back, what will it look like? And this is our plan. Distance learning 100% for all students. And I'm not going to read through this comprehensively, but I want to share that students will be working from home using a distance learning platform. Much of what Mrs. Barajas-Reese shared earlier will be required so that we can ensure that distance learning has been refined and improved, and that we are greatly monitoring how students are interacting and engaging. So I want to reiterate again, our shift or pivot to distance learning will be significantly different than our experience in March. There has been and there will continue to be increased professional development for teachers, increased access to technology and the internet for families in need. This will continue to be tracked and monitored with our goal of having 100% access and connectivity for students in our district. We will also provide increased trainings and support for parents and families. Those trainings are being built now as we prepare to think ahead for August. We want to make sure that families have the tools to support students utilizing this instructional model. New legislation supports increased levels of accountability and monitoring online attendance, progress monitoring regarding students and teacher contact, and student engagement through distance learning. Again, this will be monitored through our learning continuity and attendance plan that was just shared with you earlier. Part of the new legislation specifically directing our work involving distance learning. And there will be new board policies that you will see later as a result of the need to shift to distance learning. This is a new model, but it's pushed education to where we probably needed to go sooner than later. There is still more work to do to ensure that all students continue to learn and that we monitor their progress, both academically, along with their social and emotional well-being. We spoke of our requirement to monitor mental health and the supports that students need. I'm pleased to say through our distance learning and school closures in March and April, we continue to provide teletherapy through our mental health clinicians and our All for Youth referrals. So we will continue those supports as we lean into distance learning for the fall. We will monitor public health conditions monthly with the goal of fully returning students to campus as soon as we're able to. That's our desire when it's safe to do so. Making a firm decision to move in this direction will provide parents with the time to plan ahead. It will also allow for administrators and teachers to establish class lists, consider how teachers will be introduced and connect with their students through individual or virtual meet and greets prior to the beginning of the school year. It will also allow time for school and district staff to work with parents and students with regard to technology needs. Supporting this recommendation will also allow time for our principals, our teachers, and district staff to begin planning for the beginning of the school year, which is less than 3 weeks away. Our management team will meet on July 27th for our launch session to discuss expectations and back to school planning. Due to the work of our reopening task force and each of the subcommittees, we are indeed ahead of things, as our reopening guidelines and our employee guidelines are already completed for when students are able to come back on campus, which we hope will be soon. As we monitor conditions, a transition plan will be brought back to the board when we're ready to move back to having students come on campus. I reiterate that a full reopening of our schools would be ideal. However, current health conditions and risk levels support a more conservative approach at this time until we're able to modify how we bring students back in a safe manner. As I shared earlier, considerations will be made as our conditions change and we commit to frequent board, parent, and stakeholder updates as a part of our communication plans until students have fully and safely returned to our campuses. So I've shared a bit with you about the reopening guidelines for students, and I wanted to just have Ms. Wood share with you the work of her team and the subcommittee with regard to employee guidelines for having employees come back on campus. Thank you.
During this process, we realized very early on that the employees needed their own set of guidelines, that we could not get enough information in the reopening task force guidelines. So that's why we did create an entire guide just for employees. There are 28 members who served on our Human Resources Subcommittee, and these people worked incredibly hard. I think we went through 5 different drafts of this plan with input changing constantly as there were updates from the county and from the Center for Disease Control. I'm going to be very, very brief and just refer you to page 3 with the table of contents. We tried to make this plan as comprehensive as possible, but also as user-friendly as possible. We just found out today that the translation on this is complete. We do have some employees who are a little bit more well-versed with Spanish than in English, and we want them to be able to access the information as well. So starting on item number 5 in the table of contents, we discuss responsibilities for safety, training. All the protocols are listed there, what we're going to do to train individuals, our social distancing protocols, face covering protocols, what is considered respiratory etiquette and hygiene, even hand washing hygiene, what's going to be done and is being done for cleaning and disinfecting, what's going to happen for building access and common areas within buildings, the daily health screening for employees that we've been doing since April, and then implementing a daily health screening for students. Right now, I'm working with the IT department and some other employees in the district to create a new tool. It will work similarly, but it will provide updates out to supervisors without me doing that manually. So it's a pretty nifty program that we're working on, as well as an app for parents. Professional responsibilities, and this is mainly for our certificated staff regarding lesson plans, and also attendance on Mondays when we do go to that blended learning model. Then information regarding the disease itself. If someone is ill, how long do they stay home? Exposure protocols. There's a close exposure protocol and a casual exposure protocol. What to do if an employee has a confirmed case of COVID. Underlying health conditions for those individuals who have chronic health conditions and who are over 65. Employees who have childcare needs, and a draft of a policy that you'll be seeing this evening as far as working remotely. So again, we tried to make this as comprehensive as possible. If you have any questions regarding each or any of the individual sections, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Very thorough, thank you.
Thank you. It is subject to change, it's fluid, and it's a living document. So.
We live by that creed. Again, I'd just like to thank everyone who worked on the employee addendum. As you can see, we wanted to tailor each of these documents. We didn't want to put all the employee things in the actual opening guidelines for parents because the audience was different. But we did create an addendum so that we covered both groups. Again, the team worked very diligently in this work, and we know that this is a difficult decision to be able to make. However, based on the recommendations that are being considered, we know that there are several districts that are having this discussion tonight that will also move in this direction. Based on the current public health conditions, we were shared, information was shared with us last night that it is a bit premature based on the surge of COVID cases in Fresno County to bring students back into what is considered quasi-congregate settings. Even if we're able to kind of maintain control when students are in the classrooms, when the bell rings and students are switching classes, it will be very difficult to try to monitor and maintain the 6-foot social distancing. I understand there's been some pullback with regard to athletics as well, because there have been some early indications that there's been some exposure in some districts with regard to just this soon with regard to some athletic programs. Some districts were trying pilots for the summer. Those programs were scrapped because of the increased incidence of community spread. One thing I do want to share is I watched the numbers for Selma, and our community is the second highest in Fresno County. The current data is that we have 357 confirmed cases within Selma, and they are currently under investigation. And those numbers are looked at weekly. So I know we're not going to be able to make everyone 100% happy, but we are going to have to make the best decision based on the ability to safely return students and staff to the school environment. Our hope is to be able to pivot as quickly as conditions will allow to a blended or a full return. But for the next 3 weeks, it's recommended that we kind of stay the course and continue with distance learning until we see what our numbers look like with regard to the community spread. One of the things that the health officials did share a concern about, and that was opening and then having to close in 2 weeks. It would be more disruptive to students and families. And so we're taking a very conservative approach. And my recommendation to the board is that a motion to approve opening 100% online with a goal of pivoting to blended learning as conditions improve. I'd be happy to take any questions before you vote on the motion.
I glanced through this, there's a lot here. Since your recommendation is to start on distance learning, are the teachers going to be in their classrooms?
We're having discussion. I spoke with Roxanne this morning. Blended learning does not negate teachers from reporting to the classroom. We would like to have teachers who are not on the restricted list. We would like to have teachers to be able to report to the classroom, because you can see all of the additional requirements and the monitoring, all the additional things that we have to do. Our model is not going to be what it was in March. And so it would be my recommendation or expectation to have teachers who are not on the COVID restriction list, or teachers who have not applied for Family Medical Leave Act, to report and work from the classroom, because there may be access to resources and materials that they need. Principals will be monitoring, follow up, and support. Support staff will be on site in case students have to come in to be serviced, particularly special ed students. So my expectation would be for teachers who are able to report. Ms. Wood, did you have any comment you want to add to that?
In addition to teachers, we were speaking about this briefly today, and it would be the expectation that all employees report, not just teachers, but all classified employees too. There's plenty of work to be done. And otherwise, people are staying home with absolutely, in some cases, work that we cannot assign them from home, but they can be beneficial and be productive reporting to work, again, exclusive of people who are under chronic health and over 65.
And our employee guideline, all these things, of course, will be monitored and maintained with regard to social distancing, cleaning and disinfecting, and all of those things relate.
I thank you for that. I support that decision. I think that if they're healthy and do not fall under the guidelines, should be in the classroom. I think it's going to be much more structured. We have teacher librarians, coaches, intervention teachers, that can be support staff, and from a centralized location, I believe it will be much more effective for benefiting and teaching our students than be spread out all over the county.
Thank you.
Couple questions any other questions from the board or comments from the board?
I kind of have a question, comment. One of the things in the session last night that was really evident to me is no one is willing to say that it's okay to go back. It's not okay to go back. Our governor isn't even willing to say, you have to go 100% off campus. When will we? I mean, they're leaving it to us as individual districts to make that choice. How will we know? When will we know it's okay? These kids, it's such a battle because these kids want to be back on campus. They need that, but we have to protect them and keep them healthy and keep their families healthy. But, you know, we're talking learning loss here. And for those kids who want to go on to college, yes, the colleges are going to understand that there was that learning loss. But the prerequisites to get into those college courses, they're going to suffer when they get into those classes. So we need to have some kind of a plan on when do we know? When do we go? When do we jump? We got to get them back on campus. That's just me talking from the heart as a parent and as a concerned community member.
Of course. And it's a valid question. We raised that. I was on a 2-hour meeting today, and superintendent said, just tell us when we hit this benchmark and when the curve is flattened and there are no more, this many cases have been tested and there's no more evidence of spread, is that the marker that we can then go? So we're waiting to hear from public health on that response. They're just saying right now,
Right.
but they're not giving us an indicator as to what benchmark it will be. But we know that in the governor's phased plans, there were certain indicators on the spread and the testing and other things that needed to be met before moving through different stages. I think some of the health practitioners and officials yesterday indicated we're having a problem with our testing, contact tracing, and isolating cases. And until we get that fixed, we can't get a hold on the community spread.
Because, I mean, all of us on the board, with the exception of Jennifer, we don't have a medical background.
Correct.
How do we know when it's safe?
Right.
We don't have that expertise. So,
Well, and even working in healthcare, and now that I'm back working in the ER, the testing is not there. That's just not, if you look at the number of people that live in just the Central Valley versus the number of tests that they've done, it's a drop in the bucket. And it's so hard to say, when what is that number? What is that magic number as to, when it's okay to return?
So yes, we're at the mercies of those professionals and practitioners that will tell us, okay, when you hit this, if you're in this range, it's less risk. I don't think they'll ever say it's 100% risk free until there's a vaccination, maybe. And then can you get 100%? But they are indicating that now the risk level is very, very high.
And let me share also a few things from that meeting last night that I took out of it. It's helping me make this decision, whether I like it personally or not. The doctor shared some data about the less likely that students pass it to each other and then to home. The data shows that that's not a common occurrence. Even though it does happen, the more common thing is a protection of our adults and our staff, who are very likely to pass it much easier. I did appreciate the head of pediatrics from
Valley Children's.
Valley Children's, even though he's not an educator or a politician, he made something that I felt, and I was glad to hear, even though it's his opinion, frankly, and I agree with it, that to put 15 children in a 900 square foot room and keep social distancing and also keep masks on them for 7 hours is an unreasonable and almost impossible thing to do. I mean, we haven't heard anybody really want to say that within education.
right.
And again, he's not in education, but he was a doctor and is used to working with young children with masks. And I appreciated his honesty and candor on that.
I work, as some of you know, at a private college. We have gone back on campus, and these are adults. The adults cannot keep their masks on. The adults refuse to social distance. We can control them in the classroom, but we cannot control them in the public areas. And we are slowly quarantining one class at a time. So we're going to have a hard time.
And the last thing I took from that, one of the superintendents, I believe it was the gentleman from Central, asked the county point blank, if we go back to school under your recommendations, and if we have an outbreak, are we going to have your support? And it was deathly silent. The Department of Health would not step up and support the school district when asked that directly, which is frightening somewhat. But
Yeah.
it helped me make my decision that we're going to make later.
And I think for me, that same, so those of you who don't know, we listened to a county webinar last night that was hosted by Jim Yavino, and he had on the public health, the doctor who's in charge of public health, and then a couple of physicians from Valley Children's Hospital. Very, very enlightening webinar. Again, some of the things that I walked away with was based on the numbers right now, it's a 10% positivity rate. So 1 out of 10 people right now are testing positive, even though the numbers aren't really high, that's what it's averaging. And I think the big thing that they also said was that in order to be able to reopen schools fully, is they have to get control of community spread. And until they get control of community spread, then they're not going to recommend, or they're not going to say either way, but it's not safe to open. So that's what I walked away with yesterday from that. Dr. Fisher has asked that we do vote tonight. We can do that now because it is not it's technically not an agendized action item. So as long as there's no objection from the board for us to go ahead and vote on this as an action item, we can go ahead and do so. The motion would be to start the year 100% distance
online.
So
And
moved.
with the recommendation to reevaluate as conditions change.
I'll make that motion.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
How do we monitor the students at home if they're online or not, if they're actually in class? I don't know if I've heard that yet at any meeting so far.
Right. And I think that is part of why the legislation was put into place. Because when we made the initial shifts, when districts made the initial shift, we were crisis management. But as we're looking into distance learning moving forward, we have to make sure we put systems in place so that teachers are making daily contact with students, whether that's through a phone call, whether that's through setting up Google Classroom times, a daily schedule, checking in with parents. So we're having to look at all of that and ensure those things are in place. And those are the things we have to report out in our report that Norma spoke about earlier. So we have to figure out how to make it happen and what to do. We can't just say, oh, Johnny's not logging on. Well, it might mean extra effort to make a contact with his parents, follow up with Johnny. It may mean a home visit, a socially acceptable, socially distanced home visit. But we can't lay back and say, well, I just haven't heard from Johnny. So we'll be developing as we go along.
So we have a motion. Oh, yeah. So we have a motion. We need a second.
Second.
Second from Carl. Before I call for the vote, there was a couple things that popped up. There were a couple of questions regarding the computers in the classrooms. They may not or do not have cameras and microphones. So that's something that's going to have to be looked at.
Most definitely. We can't ask folks to do a job without having the tools they need.
So then there was another question, will teachers be able to bring their own devices in? This is stuff that is going to have to be worked out over the next several weeks. There was one other comment I was going to, and I think there's some job specific questions that are being asked. So I'm not ignoring your questions, the people out there, but so your job specific questions, you're going to need to direct those to your supervisor and your department. This is going to be, I think we need to make this decision now. So we give everybody time to adjust, to figure out, what this is going to look like again. And not just, tell you the day before school starts, hey, by the way. So, and then, so we'll go ahead and if any other questions or comments, I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote myself. Aye. Carl.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
And Diane.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We'll get to work.
All right. Now on to new business, Larry.
Thank you very much. We have received a proposal from our architect, Teeter, to, as you recall from a previous meeting, I asked the board to give us permission to start working on designing some projects to maintain our pavement throughout the district, because we have some areas that, many areas that just need maintenance, such as a slurry coat and repainting of the lines, but we also have several parking areas or driveway areas that are basically beyond repair and need to be torn up and replaced. Teeter has given us a proposal. They estimate that the total cost of the work will be $1.7 million if the board moves forward with these projects. And their proposal to do the design work is $274,000. I had to swallow hard when I saw that number, because it is a large percentage. When you're used to ordering design work for buildings, it's usually in the range of 8 to 9%, whether it's modernization or new construction. So this is a larger percentage than that. There are at least two items that are causing that fee to be a higher percentage. One is that pavement work just isn't that expensive. To pay somebody to on a great big tractor to rip up pavement and then prepare the roadbed and put that pavement back down just as on a square foot percent basis is just not that expensive compared with putting in a new building, which can be $300 or $400 a square foot. But the design work is still there. They still have to do all the design work. They still have to go to DSA, the state architect's office, because it has to meet ADA compliance regulations. And in the case of several of our projects, they will need to do a topographical survey to make sure that the stormwater is draining properly when they replace the asphalt. They will have to do storm water pollution prevention plans, which are extremely time intensive to do those plans. And they have to work with the state water board, which, as many of you know, can be very intensive. So that drives the cost up. So even though it is a higher percentage of the cost of construction than we are typically used to paying, I'd like to recommend that the board approve these plans, or approve going ahead with the design of the plans. If you do approve, then we'll go through the design work, and when they are at the point where they're ready to go out to bid, I will come back again to the board and ask you for permission to solicit bids. And at that point, we'll have an update on the estimated cost of the construction project. And if the board approves this item, it would be paid for using Measure O funds. Do you have any questions on this request?
I know we had talked a little bit about in pre-board about looking at the solar panels underneath at Roosevelt, getting that paved. Was that?
They will look at that.
Okay.
I didn't have enough time to get that any numbers
Okay.
back for this meeting, but we will look at that project. And Dr. Fisher asked me to look at the space behind the district office as well.
Oh, okay. So with that, we need a motion.
I'll motion to approve 23B1.
I'll second it.
Motion from Diane, a second from Paul to approve 23B1 as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Carl?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Myself? Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Next item is a proposal from my office to enter into an agreement with, this is for Comcast. We've received a proposal from Comcast, and this is not a new program from them. This has been in place for many years, where Comcast will offer those families who are eligible for free or reduced lunch cable internet for $9.95 per month. We'll call that $10. And but now because of COVID, because we have so many students who are learning from home, they are allowing school districts to pick up that cost. And so the students, the families will get the benefit of having cable internet, even though, and many of our families can't afford even the $10 per month. So this proposal calls for the school district to pick up that cost, $10 per month, not to exceed 12 months. Could be renewable beyond that if it's necessary. We certainly hope it is not. But 12 months is the minimum. The proposal is to not go less than 12 months. So if the board approves this, it would be, we are estimating that we have done, all of our principals have done counts. They've done phone calls and can't do emails because they don't have internet, but we've done, in some cases, text messages because some of them do have cell service. And at this time, we're estimating that about 1,000 of our families both live within the Comcast service area and do not currently have internet service. Now as we'll talk on the next item, we'll talk about those families who live outside the Comcast service area. But this just deals with those who are, it's not exactly this within the city limits. There are many families that live outside the city who are still within the Comcast service area. So we are estimating at this point it's 1,000 families. If it turns out to be less than that, then we won't pay for those. We'll only pay for those who actually get service. I'll put it that way. So it could be less than 1,000. However, I will also say that there were a large number of families that we could not reach. I think at one point the high school had 900 students that we couldn't reach. We couldn't call them. Nobody would answer the phone, or the phone was disconnected, or so and so on. So when these students do start re-enrolling in school, we may find that there's a lot more out there that do not have internet service. So right now we are estimating 1,000. If it comes to pass that the number of more than that, we will come back and ask the board for more licenses for Comcast. And again, if it turns out to be 1,000, it's $10 per month times 12 months would be $120,000. And we're recommending that we would use the new federal CARES Act funds to pay for these licenses.
I'd just like to interject. On our last survey, our pre-enrollment survey, we were asking parents that specifically because we wanted to know if we were going to have folks doing online, what would that entail? And we looked at our numbers, and I think out of 3,500 folks who've already registered, we had 594 who said that they had no computer, and 138 that said they didn't have access. So we're tracking and monitoring that so we can make sure that we are addressing the issue, and we have the funds to be able to do that through the CARES Act.
I think that's one of the main criteria in this request is that the federal government through the state is giving school districts throughout the country, not just Selma or not just California, giving us funds specifically for these types of purchases so we can get internet access, so we can get devices to those families who do not have them. Do you have any other questions on this item?
Move to approve 23B2.
I'll second.
Motion from Paul, a second from Carl to approve 23B2 as presented. Any other questions or comments?
I do have one. I think you said this, Larry. I'm not sure I heard you. If that's just an estimate, if we have less, will be less. If we have more.
Correct. We will only pay for, right now, the max will be 1,000 because that's the most you are authorizing. But if there are less than 1,000, we'll only pay for those who actually sign up.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Paul,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
myself, aye. Carl,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you very much. Item 23B3 is very similar, only this agreement is with T-Mobile. And this, in this agenda item request, T-Mobile, working with the state of California, has actually donated the devices. These are called hotspots. It's a mobile device that operates on a cell service as opposed to a wireless Wi-Fi service. So T-Mobile is donating the hotspots, which usually go for about $150 each. So that is a very, very big donation. And Selma Unified, we have 500 of these in our warehouse right now. So we already have these hotspots in the warehouse. T-Mobile is proposing to has offered the cellular service for $20 per month per hotspot, which is a giant discount from what their usual rate is, and that's for up to 12 months, and it, if necessary, can be renewable for another 12 months. At this time, it's my recommendation to purchase 500 packages, subscriptions at $20 per month for 12 months. In this case, we do need to buy the full 500. That was part of the package. If you get 500 free devices, you have to buy 500 subscriptions. But as I mentioned, we are getting those for 12 months at a large discount, and the service is unlimited. So you may have heard with some other hotspots, they only get 4 gigs of service per month, and that's used up in a matter of days. But these are unlimited. Again, we are continuing to survey our families. So our first go-to will be for those families that do not currently have access. We'll go to Comcast if they're in that service area, because it's half the cost. But if they're outside the Comcast area, we can provide them with a hotspot and the service for 1 year. And this also would be paid for using the CARES Act funds. Do you have any questions on this request?
Move to approve 23B3.
I'll second.
Motion from Paul, a second from Carl to approve 23B3 as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Diane,
Aye.
myself, aye. Carl,
Aye.
and Paul,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you very much. On the next item, we have received an estimate from our architects to go out to bid, for the full cost of refinishing the gym floor at Selma High. Their estimate of the cost of the work is $55,000. I'm still working with Mr. Israelian on the timing for that. With the decision that the board made tonight, it's probably going to make that quite a bit easier to do that floor during what normally would be school time. So we would like to ask the board to allow us to solicit bids for this project. If you allow that, we will advertise those bids and bring those back to you probably at your first meeting in September. And if assuming that those bids come in at or near budget, we'll ask the board to accept either accept the low bid or reject all of the bids. Do you have any questions on this request?
Move to approve 23C.
I have a quick question. Where is the funding coming from?
This is Measure O. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to jump to the next section, 23D. I do not see that on the facility implementation plan included in it for Measure O funds. So is this something we're doing outside of that plan?
That's my fault. It's such a small project. I considered it just part of the high school modernization and didn't make it a specific line item within the high school plan. I apologize for that.
So we still need a second.
I'll second.
Motion from Paul, a second from Carl to approve 23C as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Myself, aye. Carl,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Diane,
No.
motion passes.
Thank you very much.
23D.
Okay, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Texera.
Thank you. We have with us on the line tonight, we have Janet Kliegel and we have Kush Jigara. I will never get that name right, from Caldwell Forest Winters. And Caldwell has gone through a great amount of work, actually visiting all of our school sites, looking in all the classrooms and offices and restrooms. And they have updated the facilities plan that they did back in 2015 or 16, I believe it was. And they have a very comprehensive proposal for the board to consider tonight for the use of our remaining Measure A and Measure O funds. And I am going to try to turn it over to Kush at this time. And Kush, do you have control of your, can you share your screen with the board?
Yes, I can do that, Larry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kush Gyara with CFW. Thank you very much for inviting me to your board meeting tonight. Along with me is Janet Kliegel, who will be assisting me in the presentation. And we also have my colleagues, Sarah Fishleader and Jordan Miles on the line. They were involved in preparing this plan update. So I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen, Larry, and see if it lets me do that. Could you see the screen?
We can see that here. Thank you, Kush.
Excellent, super. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just go through the first couple of pages very quickly, and I want to focus on the latter pages, which I'll be turning over to Janet, where I'd like to go school site by school site, the improvements that we propose. And I just wanted to give you a bit of background before we go there. Before that, I do want to thank Larry and his staff very much, and Dr. Fisher, who, despite everything that you're going through at this time, dealing with the pandemic, were very generous with that time and assisted us in putting this document together. So just as a review of the 2016 plan, the intent of this 2016 plan, as you know, at the time of Measure O, was to update the schools. It involved the upgrades to the football stadium and classrooms at Selma High. At all schools, we intended to modernize classrooms and bring in 21st century learning environments. And there was also an intent, to the extent possible, to replace portable classrooms with permanent construction where possible. At that time, the estimate was about $64 million, and there was primarily two sources of funding. Measure O, which the election was subsequently successful, as well as state aid, which accounted for the funding to that plan. As we've gone through the last 4 years, there was a couple of changes to both the increase in the scope of the projects and additional potential projects we considered, as well as enhancements to the funding. And as the board is very well aware, the board elected to do the stadium project more completely, and the scope was expanded. There was a construction of a new library and other improvements at Garfield that was not initially contemplated, but did need to be done. There is a consideration of adding a school-based clinic, which is considered in the new overall budget. There's classroom modernizations, which were increased. The scope was improved a little bit over there. There was adjustments for inflation. And one of the bigger changes was a possible change in the scope for the industrial arts building, which was initially contemplated as just a modernization for about $1.5 to $2 million, to potentially tearing down those buildings and replacing them if we were able to garner CTE grants. And we'll come to that just a little bit later on in this presentation, because those CTE grants from the state were not an option that was available at the time the plan was contemplated. So while there was a budget increase, there was also some factors to offset those budget increases. The two items over there was the sale of the remaining 2006 election bonds. As you know, there was about $5 million, which at the time of the 2006 plan would have been very expensive to access, because those bonds issuance involved utilizing zero coupon bonds or capital appreciation bonds. However, we presented the board, and the board elected to avail of historically low interest rates. And we've sold about $4 million of that $5.5 million to date. at a repayment ratio of less than 2 to 1, substantially lower than the state's maximum amount of 4 to 1. And there's about $1.5 million that we anticipate we would be bringing back to the board very shortly to be able to sell. So that $5 million of the 2006 authorization was not contemplated in the original plan. Also not contemplated in the original plan is the CTE, the Career Technical Education funding that was a option that the state had established subsequent to the plan. We have applied for several pathways. Janet will be able to give you more details if desired on that one. Currently, the state has not decided whether those pathways will be funded or not. We know that we made the first cut on most of the pathways, but there's a second pass the state is doing. And we, depending on how many districts are ahead of us, we may or may not get funded for that one. And that is an open item that I'll come to a little bit later on, that how we address the industrial arts building will depend heavily on our ability to garner monies from the state. If we're able to garner all of those grants, we would look for options to be able to tear down and rebuild those buildings. If we're not able to garner all of those grants, we'll likely have to move back to the modernization approach. But once again, it's been this board's intent to look for state dollars wherever possible. And even if we do not get those grant dollars, at least the community knows that we made a good faith effort, or the best effort we could, to go ahead and apply for those funds. So anytime we can get money from Sacramento as compared to taxing our local folks, it's something that we look to do. Finally, on this slide, I think it's acknowledged that while our district and most districts have many, many needs, and there's many things they'd like to do, the identified sources of funding are unlikely to be available to fund all of those improvements. And you'll see a little bit later on that there's some improvements that have already been funded. There's some improvements that we have identified sources to fund. And there's other improvements that we acknowledge we're going to need. And we're carrying those, but we don't have an identified source of funding at this time. The identified sources of funding are insufficient to complete all the desired projects by the district. So with that, on the next page, the current plan overview. The last time I had come to the board, I had indicated that we had been working with staff. And given that the statewide bond in March of 2020 did not pass, and that it's going to be at least probably 2022 before the statewide bond passes, if there is another statewide bond that is placed at that time, the state has not been coming through with their share of construction projects. On that basis, as compared to completing some schools with local bond funds, which we know we have in hand, and awaiting state funding, which is a little bit uncertain for the future funding of projects, and finding ourselves where some schools have received improvements and in other schools may have to wait a while to get the improvements. It was the intent to go out into the community, survey the schools, and identify basic needs at all schools, to use the monies we have on hand to bring all schools up to a basic level, basic standard, a basic level, and make sure that all schools get a benefit or a part of the bond proceeds. Since we will be upfronting a component of the project costs, which would normally be borne by the state, what we would then be able to do is submit an application to the state, say we've already completed this project, you owe me a reimbursement, and as funds become available, and they will not become available until there's another statewide bond, you should then reimburse me for those funds, and I can use the state aid reimbursement funds for future projects. So the current plan overview, the main takeaway from that one is the change from the original 2016 plan, which was to sequentially go to schools, start with the high school, go back to the elementaries, go back to the middle school, and work on the school sequentially. We're doing that differently, and we're looking to be able to make sure every school gets some benefit from the bond dollars that taxpayers are paying. The board may recall this is a concept that I had brought to you about 2 months ago. I know it wasn't an action item, but I do believe there was informal support at the board level to proceed with that. And so that's what the plan reflects. With that, I'd like to go on to the page of the sources of funds. I know that the print is very small over here, okay, but I'll broadly attempt to explain to you what you're seeing in the table. The table has a couple of different rows, okay? The rows represent the sources of funding that we have. The first one is the local general obligation bonds. That's the most certain funding. We either have, actually at this point, we have most of it in the bank, and we hope to have that remaining $1.5 million in the bank within the next 45 to 60 days. We will be coming to the board with documents for your consideration once staff directs us to do so. So the first two columns, completed in progress with bond funds, those are bond funds that we have already issued, and those are bond funds that have already been pledged to completing projects. And that 10 million, the first column, the 15 million, essentially the uses in that 15 million are the stadium project and the improvements to Garfield, the library, and also a roofing project at the high school. We had anticipated actually needing more to do the stadium, the roofing project, and Garfield. And if you may remember, we had come back to you in 2019 and requested the issuance of $7 million of bonds, which the board did approve. And the board correspondingly, those bonds were sold. Of that $7 million, we only needed to augment the initial sale by $5 million to construct the stadium, do the roofing project at the high school, and do Garfield. That left us $2 million left over after all of those commitments. And those $2 million now show up in the second column. So the second row is split into two columns. The $5 million is already pledged or expended. The remaining $2 million is unencumbered and is available to fund additional projects that Janet will be describing to you. In addition to that, in the next row for the second column, you'll see an amount of $13.7 million. That was the 2016 election, the remaining authorization that has already been sold. So at this point, we've sold all of the remaining 2016 bonds. And that 13.7 million was sold pretty much at the historic low interest rates that we've seen in a 30-year career, in my 30-year career. And correspondingly, once again, the burden on the taxpayers is limited because anytime you can borrow money at a low interest rate, it's cheaper to pay it back over time. In addition to that, as mentioned, we've sold about $4 million of the 2006 election funds, but that brought us up to our bonding debt limit. And as the new assessed valuation is announced for your district, which we anticipate will be within the next few days, even a slight growth in assessed valuation will in turn allow us to issue the remaining $1.5 million of bonds. So the last row under local general obligation bonds, that $1.5 million hasn't been issued yet. It isn't in the bank, but everything above that is in the bank. And we hope to have that $1.5 million in the bank within the next 45 to 60 days, if directed by your staff and if approved by the board. So the main emphasis is the first two columns. That funding is about as certain as it can be. That's figuratively and literally money in the bank. The third column after that, which is the proposed next phase, state aid. Remember, I had talked about the district. If the district upfronts the entire cost of the project, there is a mechanism, an established mechanism for the district to then apply to the state for a reimbursement. So what that $21 million represents, and please, once again, accept this as an approximate number. I should have written down the phrase that was used earlier, that this is a live document. It is subject to change and probably will change as the state revises their funding formula. But we anticipate receiving approximately $21 million in total reimbursements from the state over time. That one is less certain, that money, and those funds, we are dependent on the state, A, having the monies to do it, and B, We're depending on the state also not changing the rules on us, okay, which could hopefully make the money higher, as it did with the CTE grants, okay, but could also potentially make the money lower. Okay. So the next column, the third column, once again, is speculative is too strong a word, okay, but is less certain than the bond funds, which we'll actually have on hand. Okay. And then finally, there's the future phases of funds, okay, which is potentially future developer fees they may get, the district may get, okay, any additional state aid grants, any other local funds that you may have. Okay. Those funds haven't been identified yet, okay, but it is our goal to continue to identify any opportunities to seek those funds, okay, and to be able to complete additional projects that are not contemplated in this update, okay, but that we acknowledge will need to be done over time. So with that, before I turn it over to Janet for going through the school site by school site, project by project, okay, I wanted to just pause over here and see if there was any questions from the board or the staff on the items I've discussed so far. Super.
So far, Kush, thank you.
Okay, super. Then, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to go into the proposed phases at the high school and middle school. You'll see these columns are somewhat are not somewhat consistent. They are consistent with the prior page, which has the same titles as the source of funding. We have not only identified the projects, but we've identified what pot of money those projects are going to come from. The first column that Jan will be walking you through, completed in progress, for example, the stadium and the roof replacement. The stadium is essentially complete. The roof replacement project is underway at the high school. Okay. And those were funds that have already been, bonds that have been sold and funds that have been spoken for. The next column picks up the bonds that we have sold in 2020, plus the bond that we intend to sell, the remaining $1.5 million, plus the remaining funds that were not needed from the prior bond sales, the $2 million. Okay. So the next column, the X marks in the next column, essentially represent the $21 million. Okay. And it is our level, we believe that funding for the first two columns is highly likely because for the most part, once we sell that remaining $1.5 million, those will be dollars in the bank. Okay. The third column, the proposed next phase, okay, are projects that we intend to fund from state aid in the future as it becomes available. Once again, it is an identified source of funding, the state aid. It is an identified reimbursement amount, okay? But there's some uncertainty on when those funds will be available, okay? And if the state changes those, okay? So it's a little bit less certain than the first two columns that we see marked down over there. Okay? So we've tried to push the slightly lower priority projects, okay, down to the state aid section and try and keep the higher priority projects to be bond funded. And finally, in future phases, okay, we've identified there are other projects that we know of, okay, like it would be really nice to replace the gym cooling system at the high school. Okay? We acknowledge it's a project the district would like to do. We do not have funds identified for that right now. Okay? We're still carrying it as part of the plan, okay? But please understand there is not identified funding for that. We'll continue to seek funding for that. Okay? And as and when funding becomes available, the board will be, we will bring back to the board for their consideration as to how the additional funding is used for the future phases. Okay? So with that, Janet, if I may turn it over to you, please, to go school by school, okay? Project by project, okay? And the goal over here is to seek any input, any tweaks the board would like. Okay? And if this makes sense, great, we have our marching orders. And if not, obviously we would make the tweaks as directed by you.
Thank you, Kush. Good evening. It's good to see you all again. The projects that have been identified at the high school, and we've worked with your district administration and your facilities director in identifying these projects. And as Kush said, they were done to create equity across the schools, as well as to pick up some of the most basic needs that you have first, and then bring additional improvements to your district as we go forward. So at the high school, as you know, the football stadium and the track have been completed, and the roof replacement is being done. The next items would all come from bond funds, and that would be to install double glazed windows. And one of the good reasons for doing that is not only do the windows need to be replaced, but that would be a cost saving measure for the district moving forward. The library needs to be modernized. The student restrooms need to be renovated and modernized, and the classroom ventilators need to be replaced. The HVAC systems at the high school are relatively new, but by replacing the ventilators, you will make them more efficient and thereby saving the district additional money. The parking lot and the back top also need to be repaid. Then from proposed state aid funds that you would garner, we would modernize the permanent classrooms, and that would be those 21st century improvements that we had talked about in the plan. The industrial arts building needs to be modernized, but at this point, that's under a to be determined category. There is the potential for some CTE money maybe to come in and fund that, or finding other local sources. In the original plan, the desire was to construct a new Valley Folkloric classroom. And again, replacing the gym cooling system is a desire the district has. And at some point, you may need to connect to the city water. At the Heartland continuation and Selma Independent High School, again, we would replace the windows with double glazed windows for cost saving measures. Modernize the permanent classrooms, again, comes with state aid. And then there is a desire to remove portables and construct permanent classrooms, and that would come in a future phase when money is identified for those projects. At the Lincoln Middle School, in the original plan, we had talked about converting some of the classrooms into what we call STEAM pathway rooms. These would be rooms that would support the pathways at the high school. For example, you have classes at the middle school that support the advanced manufacturing program at the high school. And once you did that, you saw that program explode. Kids really wanted to be in it. This would be identifying other additional rooms that would support the pathways that lead to students being in those kinds of courses that provide for careers in well-paying jobs. Again, the parking lot in the blacktop needs to be repaid, and your student restrooms need to be remodeled and renovated. We would then modernize the classrooms, the library, and the cafeteria with state aid money when it becomes available, and that's those 21st century improvements. And again, you would like a cooling system for your gym, and we would look for identified money in the future to do that program. At the elementary schools, we'll start with Eric White. We want to renovate the student restrooms again and install those double pane windows. Door replacements for the classrooms are needed. The classrooms need to be modernized, and we would do that with modernization funds. And again, that's the 21st century modernization. And the district did desire, when we did the plan, to convert a classroom to an academy or a pathway room to support those programs at the middle school and the high school. And that would have to come from identified future funding. The library modernization, as well as removing portables and constructing new permanent classrooms, would need to come from identified future funding, and a new air conditioning system for the multipurpose room. At Garfield, we are constructing a library with the bond funds, and that's currently in progress. Garfield 2 needs double pane windows, and the flooring in the classrooms needs to be refurbished. Modernization, again, would come with state aid funding, and that's to the permanent classrooms in this, at the school. And then again, the academy room would have to come from future funding. Indianola, again, it's renovate those restrooms with the double pane windows. And you need to connect to the city water supply. And that needs to be done at that school. So we would use bond funds to do that. The classroom modernizations to the 21st century standard would come again with the state aid money. And then future identified desires would be to convert one of the classrooms to an academy room, modernize the library, remove those portables, and construct a classroom. At Jackson Elementary, we want to renovate the restrooms again, repave the parking lot, and install the double pane windows, and modernize then the insides of the classroom to the 21st century standard with state aid money. Construct additional administrative and storage space. The school does need additional administrative and storage space, and looking at ways to do that with future funding. And convert the classroom to an academy room, as well as modernize the library. And the remaining elementary schools, we have Roosevelt Elementary, and again, the rest, we want to do the renovate the student restrooms, install double pane windows, and the school needs a new roof, and the parking lot needs to be resealed. The modernization, again, to the 21st century classrooms would come with the state aid money. And then future funding would be used to remove the portables, convert a classroom to an academy room, modernize the library, and construct new permanent classrooms. At Terry Elementary School, we again would renovate the student restrooms, install the double pane windows, repave the parking lot. Modernization of the permanent classrooms would be done with state aid. And again, like the other schools, you convert a classroom to an academy room, you modernize the library, remove the portables, and build new permanent classrooms with additional money. Washington Elementary, they too need to have the student restrooms renovated, and you need to also construct new student restrooms at that school. The modernization of the classrooms to the 21st century standard would come with the state aid money. And removing portables and constructing new permanent classrooms, again, would be come from an identified future funding source. Wilson Elementary would be renovate the student restrooms, install double glazed windows, reseal the parking lot. Also, you would, as the other schools, do the modernization with state aid money to the permanent classrooms, and then again constructing or converting a classroom to an academy room and modernizing the library would come with funds that would be determined in the future. Oh, Kush, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if this approach makes sense to you, what we would do is we would go then through the process of the various next steps, grouping these projects together, engaging a designing team, beginning the construction process, and ensuring that these projects are done. Okay? Please understand that this plan is preliminary. Okay? Once again, costs could change, funding could change, but we wanted to establish at least a roadmap that we have, okay? And then the board can amend it as we go along if needed. Okay? With that, ladies and gentlemen, be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And if this makes sense to you, we'll get to work once your staff directs us to.
Any questions from the board? Any of this? There are a couple from the community. Actually, and I'd like to point out, I want to make sure that we're looking at all of our roofs in our district. I think the big thing is our student restrooms and the roofing. In the chat here, I noticed there's somebody mentioned how did they get on that list for repair? The site that they're at has a lot of roof issues, and I know it's not Roosevelt. I know it's Indianola is the site that they're at. So that's being asked, Larry. I don't know if you were able to address that or make sure that the roofs are all being looked at.
We went through a process of looking through our historical records to find out how old each roof was, when was the last time it was replaced or modernized, or had any major repairs done. And And Cush and his team built that into their projects. So if we do have a roof out there that, we really depend a lot on the school staff to tell us if they end up having any leaks.
Okay.
We try to replace those as quickly as possible. But if we have one that's been worked on and is still not holding the water out, then we'll have to relook
Okay.
at that.
Okay, so it just needs to be brought to the district's attention then, is what I'm hearing. There's a comment, since students now are not going to be on campus in the fall, is it possible to get these improvements happening sooner than later? I would think that would definitely, hopefully.
Well, it's as you're well aware, this is a very, very
True.
long
True
process. We will probably have to start by going through another competitive process for our design team. So if we have any hope of getting state reimbursement somewhere down the line, we have to make sure that we're crossing off all the state's boxes.
And then another question was, what is the academy pathway room? What would that look like?
Janet, perhaps you can answer that one.
Sure. Those would be determined school by school. So different schools would choose to have different kinds of academy rooms. Some schools, for instance, would like that to be a science kind of room where kids go in there and learn certain science projects. Another school might choose it to be an engineering room. We've had schools choose them to be music rooms. So generally the school makes a decision as to what kind of room they want. When we were talking with Dr. Fisher about that, we were talking about STEAM. So it would have maybe an art flavor. It could have an engineering flavor, technology. Maybe students go there and learn to build robotics and that kind of thing that then prepare students to go into those advanced manufacturing. It might be music, and then that prepares them to go into additional music programs. But those are, when they are designed to be done, the school site actually works on we work with the school site on the kind of program that they want to have, and then they're designed to meet that kind of program.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? If not, we need a motion.
Move to approve 23D.
I'll second.
Motion from Paul, a second from Diane to approve 23D as presented. Kush, I just want to say I'm glad to see all the restrooms that are listed on here. You know, I had to say something. I can't let that slip by.
I want you to notice that we put them at the top of the list when we were preparing them. I said, please put them first, okay? And put everything.
I
else.
appreciate it, Kush. I appreciate it.
I bet, Kush, you still haven't been inside very many of them.
All right. Hearing any other comments? Hearing none. Carl,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
myself, aye. Motion passes.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get to work. Thanks.
Kush and Janet, thank you very much for all your time on this.
Yes, please.
That's funny.
So you have before you our tentative agreement with SUDA for our contract reopeners for 2020. The first page is a very brief synopsis of all the changes that were made, just for your convenience. And then the actual, all the articles that were open, whether they were changed or not, were also included for you, including the supplemental evaluation forms that were part of negotiations. If the board has any questions regarding the tentative agreement. Just for the board's information, I did check with SUDA today, and unfortunately, they have not been able to ratify yet. They ran into a little snag in that they don't actually have anything in their bylaws to allow virtual voting. So they're trying to take care of that, and hopefully we'll be able to have a ratification meeting that I can report back to the board at our next meeting.
We need a motion.
Motion to approve 23E.
Second.
Motion from Diane, a second from Paul to approve 23E as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Paul?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Myself, aye. And Carl?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to also thank Suda for negotiating during the summertime and for wrapping this contract negotiations up in a very timely manner. Dr. Fisher, you and I shared these next board policies. Do you want me to go ahead and introduce those, or do you want to do that? There are three board policies before you this evening that are coming before the board as a first reading. And the first one is Board Policy 0470, COVID-19 Mitigation Plan. The second is Board Policy, and with all the numbers listed, those encompass all employee groups, classified, certificated, and management. So 4113.5, 4213.5, and 4313.5, working remotely, and also Board Policy 6157, distance learning. And these are based on the recommendations from the sample board policies from CSBA. If you have any questions regarding these,
And these don't need a motion, right? It's just the first read? Okay,
just first reading, and then we'll return to the
next board meeting.
board with the motion, with the recommendation for approval. On 23G, we have a proposed job description for a distance learning teacher. Again, very timely with this, and that we were able to incorporate much of the new legislation. And again, we had nothing like this, unfortunately, in March through June. And as Dr. Fisher stated, things are going to have to look a lot different based on the requirements that are being placed on us by the state and that are now a part of this legislation. So approximately half of this job description is directly from the legislation and the tenets of that, those new laws. If you have any questions regarding this job description?
Move to approve 23G.
I'll second.
Motion from Paul, a second from Diane to approve 23G as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Diane?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Carl?
Aye.
And Paul?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. On 23H, I have a proposal before the board to freeze one classified position. It's a 5 3/4 hour position, instructional assistant bilingual. The class that was associated with this instructional aid position does not exist anymore. We had 2 kindergarten classes at Terry. One of them, the classes have moved up and become first grade classes, which we do not have instructional aides in our first grade classes. So therefore the position becomes obsolete. It is vacant. The person who held the position actually resigned and is doing her student teaching. She is moving into the teaching field. So it would be my recommendation to freeze this position. And I did have a discussion with CSEA regarding this. So they're fully understanding that this is a vacant position. The cost savings associated with that for 2021, including statutory benefits, would be $22,876.
Motion to approve 23H.
I'll second.
Motion from Carl, a second from Diane to approve 23H as presented. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Myself, aye. Carl?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And Diane?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. And no conference attendance or field trip requests, of course. And then it's back to Dr. Fisher.
Board reports. Anybody have anything?
Sorry.
All right.
Okay,
Dr. Fisher.
just have something I need to share with the board as a matter of compliance. County School says we have to provide you all with that information. There's no action required. It's just the mandatory consolidation of elections. It's an ed code requirement that the board be made aware of the requirement for the county to notify you every year. And so that's all this is. Now you have to know.
Oh, I've been noticed.
That's it. I've already discussed my items, and I'd like to thank the board for your support as we move forward and getting ready to get the school year going.
All right. With that, we need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, We've already
Oh,
done the
facility?
facility. We're good, right? I think we're.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Motion from Carl, a second from Paul to adjourn. All in favor, Carl?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Dan?
Aye.
Myself, aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.